Many people are saying that it is not the decision to pull out of Afghanistan that people are blaming him for, the way it is being done. That is what people are criticizing. Many people are criticizing. And the president himself said the images that he saw at the airport, Kabul airport, gut-wrenching. He described those images as gut-wrenching. And of course, I don't recall seeing anything like that, like people hanging on to the wheels of the aircraft as the aircrafts are taking off. That's unbelievable, but unbelievable stuff. Can you touch on the impact, the possible impact on the South Asian region, like the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China? All these countries are there. What kind of impact can they have since Taliban have come back, returned to power after 20 years again?
Well, the most immediate impact would be the flood of refugees coming out of Afghanistan. These are Afghans who are worried about what life might be under Taliban rule, and they are flowing out of the country. And I mean, even before the Taliban take over, Afghanistan is like the third largest in terms of number of refugees in the world. This is according to UN data. Even before the Taliban take over, there's about 2.5 million refugees coming out of Afghanistan. That's the latest number. This will no doubt increase that number, and that will create a lot of headaches for the neighboring countries, including Pakistan and Iran as well. Now, beyond that, beyond the crisis, the refugee crisis that the Biden administration is also paying attention to and trying to help regional countries in dealing or anticipating with that. Beyond that, there is also, of course, the change or disruption in the balance of power in the region, right? I mean, this is certainly creating the opening or the opportunity for more conflict and more chaos. It's a loss of regional stability. It may embolden Pakistan's regional ambition, something that obviously India is very worried about. We just don't know at this point what's going to happen, but certainly the vacuum that the US is leaving is something that other regional powers such as China and Russia and Iran, to a certain extent, are looking into and seeing how they can fill that void, but also at the same time being very mindful of the possible confusion or possible volatility in the region. So certainly in terms of what's happening in the immediate term, which is the refugee crisis, and in the intermediate and longer term, which is what happens to the balance of power in the region, whether it will trigger instability. That's something that we will need to monitor in the weeks and months to come.
What do you think is the role of the international organizations right now?
Well, certainly the UN is already handling the issue. The UN Security Council is meeting on Afghanistan. The G7 is meeting on Afghanistan. The human rights organizations, including from the UN, including the refugee agencies within the UN, they're all focusing on this, and they are trying to help. And then in the longer term, it's also, what happens with human rights and civil society in Afghanistan under the Taliban. That's something that human rights organization and international agencies will be looking at and hopefully be able to make a difference, whether it's in terms of pressuring the Taliban government, Afghanistan under Taliban government. This is something that the US is thinking of doing by building some sort of coalition with international partners to ensure that Taliban, at least, number one, does not allow Afghanistan to be a breeding ground for terrorism, and number two, uphold some sort of basic measure of human rights, according protection of women and minorities. And one important leverage that could be held in this issue is the fact that the US government has frozen Afghan government assets that are held in American banks. That's about $9.5 billion. This is something that they will certainly use to pressure the Taliban in order to become, less of a pariah in the international stage. But we'll see whether or not that will succeed.
As regards the international reactions that we talked about, We know that India has evacuated all their diplomats from Kabul. And we also know that Russia and China, they have expressed their willingness to work with the Taliban. That we know. And as we talk now, things are so fluid in Afghanistan, things are changing. And I just saw in some reports that the U.S. administration has been urged to extend the deadline of evacuation so that everyone can be evacuated safely, because it looks like within 31st of August, it may not be possible to evacuate everyone there who are supposed to be evacuated.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something that some of the NATO member countries are asking. They're saying, this is there's no way we can get everyone that we want to get out, whether it's Americans, Afghan allies, as well as people from a number of different countries in the world who work in Afghanistan, whether in the capacity of NGOs, journalists, and so on. And so they're trying to extend the deadline. Now, the Biden administration, has not said definitively whether they would. When President Biden was asked what happens if at the end of August, not all Americans who want to get out are out yet, he seems to imply that if that happens, then yes, there is a possibility of extension. But he hasn't been very clear on that, and certainly I can understand that he doesn't want to say one way or another. And right now, what he's saying is essentially, we're just going to try to get everyone out, as many people as possible. The goal is 7,000 people a day. Whether or not they will be able to fulfill that goal still remains to be seen. But certainly, yeah, as you mentioned earlier, there is going to be movements from Iran and also from Russia and China, who have expressed their support for Taliban, saying that they recognize the need to work with the Taliban. And this is, of course, something that the U.S. government has also done. I mean, the Trump administration was the one who negotiated with the Taliban to talk about when they take over the country, essentially by overruling the Ghani government at that time. I mean, this happened in 2020. So there's also going to be a lot of introspection and looking back, because this exit, this chaotic withdrawal, happened on Biden's watch. But obviously, the war is a 20-year war, and it is the fault of not just one administration, but also the Trump administration, who made the agreement with the Taliban to exit on May 1st, and then the Obama administration, who is now being looked at, being asked, why didn't we exit Afghanistan when we killed Osama bin Laden, for example, and going back to the original, which is the Bush administration. So there's going to be a lot of questioning and a lot of analysis coming up about not only the exit, but also the 20 years that the U.S. spent in Afghanistan.
One thing needs to be mentioned, that in the last 20 years, so many American soldiers lost their lives in the battle against terror in Afghanistan. And President Biden mentioned that the sons and daughters of this country have made sacrifices. And that was one of the reasons that one of his arguments, that the American withdrawal is justified, because so many lives have been lost in the last 20 years. The whole world is watching what is going on in Afghanistan, and we shall continue to watch, keep an eye on that. Thank you so much for your time today, Patsy.
My pleasure, Asan.